Okay, so the plan for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to try and give you a slight sort of whistle-stop tour of the journey the Happy City has taken, not to sort of preach to converted, because I think most people in the room are reasonably converted, but to give each of you, many of you have been involved in bits of the puzzle, if you like, that is Happy City, and I think it's useful if people see the whole vision, and to see where we've come from, and importantly where we're going, so that the following conversations that we're hoping to have about how can we best fit in with what you're doing so that you benefit as well as we do from our collaborations and our partnerships will have much more fertile ground if we've had a good conversation about the whole process. So if I sit, is everybody okay with me sitting while I do this? I don't want people feeling like we're kind of here, but on the other hand it feels a bit formal if I stand up here.
I'll jump around if you like.
Yeah, I might take the edge and jump around as well. Okay, I created this process on Monday, and Monday was Martin Luther King Day. So I was inspired by that, and I thought I'd tell a bit of a story. So we did have a dream. We still have a dream, but we had a dream back in 2010 when we first started. I've got a very generalised flyer with things presented by the listeners down if people are into stuff afterwards. So we had this dream back in 2010. We've done so much work around the world, around helping positive change in communities, and we had a real dream that what would be different if we took those bits of inspiring things we've done in various different places, the sorts of inspirational projects we'd seen over and over again right across Bristol, and we brought them together into a unified, much more systemic approach across a city. What could be different if we helped a whole city's mind shift towards thinking about happiness and prosperity very differently, and thinking of those as the goal of society and the goal of our lives, and putting important things like money in their place as a driver towards that goal rather than the goal in itself. What would be different if we managed to do that at a city scale? But we realised right from the word go that it was very important to us, and we felt the most likely chance of success if we made that change a bottom-up change, rather than it being something that got helicoptered in by the powers that be, by government, even by us as an external body. What would happen if we went out to communities right across the city and just started conversations, started talking to people about what really mattered to them, what sort of goals did they have in life, and how could they work towards those goals in ways that were really successful and helped them and their communities to flourish. We were looking at creating a kind of tipping point of action. People often talked about tipping points, but actually could we start up enough different activities that would connect with different people in different ways, that would light that spark for people who weren't just the usual suspects. I mean that very respectfully of everybody in the room, but we've all worked on a lot of these things for a long time, and a lot of wonderful groups and wonderful ideas do an awful lot of work with people who are already really passionate about them. How could we reach beyond that? How could we reach out to communities that are a bit more than that? And in a sense, it sounds corny, but how could we inspire a city to take that step for themselves rather than needing to be pushed into taking it? How could that bottom-up change and that tipping point process then start influencing decision makers? Because actually before we started this, Mike and I were quite well connected, both in this city and beyond. So we could have done the thing of going and speaking to decision makers and getting that top-down buy-in. But actually, wouldn't it be more liberating if that grassroots process, that tipping point, inspired decision makers to go, hang on a minute, this is quite exciting, what's going on here? This inspired people to feel like they were making a difference in their city from the bottom up. And we had this vision that actually when you start doing that bottom-up and top-down process, that at the right moment, getting the policy makers and the strategic people involved would allow these small pockets of change to turn into city-scale action. We knew from the start that this needed to be then needed to include a new form of measurement, as George has rightly pointed out. What we measure, we value. And that's been part of the problem, I think, for the last 60 years, that we have been only measuring very limited aspects of our lives, and we need to measure different things. And how could we take all of the learning that we would get doing all of this activity and create a model for cities everywhere? And when I say a model, I don't mean something you just get out of a pack and plonk onto cities, but actually a really inspiring model that allowed people to take it, adapt it, work with it, and find the right context for their city, and allow this sort of change to happen in cities all over the place. So that was the dream, way back at sort of end of 2009, beginning of 2010. So we started off on that bottom-up change, and we really whistle-stop tour the next 3 years, because we tried a lot of things. We've spun a lot of plates in the last 3 years. So one of the first things we did was start out with these what we called happiness roadshows. We went to some of the most classically defined as deprived areas of Bristol, which is an interesting notion in itself, but the areas of most sort of economic deprivation, if you like, and we built all sorts of partnerships with organisations in the area, talked to an awful lot of people. We ran dozens of events alongside those partners within those areas, trying to get people to talk about things, asking people what mattered to them, asking them what worked in building happiness for themselves and their communities, and really getting those conversations going in pubs and street corners and cafes around those particular areas. We touched and influenced literally hundreds of people in those areas, and I think the thing that it really gave us was a real sense of this does work. We knew it worked from our other work, but actually in these very different contexts that we chose to do those sort of mini experiments in, it really did work. It proved to be a very high cost in terms of time for us, because you need to build those relationships and those senses of trust, and it helped us to understand that our original vision, which included doing roadshows but inspiring local people to run roadshows in their area, was a much better plan. So how could we go back to that plan and use our other projects to inspire more people to come forward, which is exactly what's happening now, to say, I love the breadth of the stuff you're doing. How can I run a bunch of these things in my area, in a sense, run their own roadshows in their area with local, coming from within? So it helped us a lot, because we learned a lot about what does work, and we also learned a lot about capacity around how to get this to start happening around the city. We've always had a big, strong emphasis on communications. It's been a really, really important part of what we do. We've got over 4,000 online followers, which I think for an organisation our size is pretty good. We've been on the radio over 25 times, TV, we've had hundreds of press and articles published on and offline. It's been a busy time. What we've got to now is a point where we've got a kind of growing group of communication people and even filmmakers who are excited about what we're doing and are creating communications and films around the things that are the drivers of happiness. So they range from communications about green issues to politics to economics, and helping people to start to see the breadth of things that make a difference to our lives, from little tiny projects in corners of the city through to big sort of global policy issues. We're trying to communicate about all of them and help these conversations to flourish all over the place. We started up all sorts of different projects. Some of you in the room have helped run some of those projects with us. Art projects, film projects, projects with young people, in community groups, with refugees. We've done a lot of things, and as I said earlier, one of the things that we've really learned is that this subject of happiness reaches way beyond those usual suspects. Actually, there is pretty much nobody in the world who isn't interested in their own happiness and their family's happiness and the future happiness of their communities. People have different ways of going about it, but actually that conversation is one that's open to all, and it's proved that through our work in projects and communities, and it's bridged a lot of those traditional divides. We've also started up quite a lot of different training projects to help people to get the skills and the confidence to understand what's in their power to do to make a difference in their communities. What can I do personally to increase my own resilience, my own flourishing, my own happiness? How can I support my community to do that? How can we have happier schools? How can we have happier workplaces? And we've got training products in all of those areas. We've worked with schools, we've worked with businesses, we've worked in communities, we've worked also in the public sector. We've been doing some quite interesting work with the City Council and with the NHS about embedding well-being into the way that we work, not just as a sort of separate add-on, but actually as a resilience about everything that we do and how we are in the world.
Sorry, can I re-emphasise the train-the-trainer element of that?
Yes,
so,
yeah.
If you weren't already saying that.
Yeah, no, I was going to come back to that, but absolutely, the way that we're doing the training in order for it to be that tipping point, trickle-out thing, is training the people who are out there in communities already. Training the people who are working with young people, or people who are working with the communities, people who are out there already. How can we support them to offer this sort of these insights and these skills in the work that they do? because they're the experts. Events, we've done loads of events, over 50 individual events. We've run 2 major Happy City zones at the Heart Festival. Through those things we've interacted with literally many thousands of people. So there are a lot of people. I'm constantly surprised when I'm out in Happy City and I'm out and about in all sorts of very strange situations. People go, oh yeah, I've seen Happy City, I know about Happy City. So that sense that this is an important subject has gone from being very peripheral to it's definitely growing around the city. And finally, the index, which is still an in-principle thing, but we have brought together, we're very lucky to be brought together a really exceptional group of people from around the country who are some of the global experts in measuring well-being and new measures of societal progress. And they've brought together this very exciting brief, and they and we are very convinced that this is potentially a very game-changing initiative. There's a lot of interest. We're starting to get into all over the place about this index tool that will help to shift the dial, if you like. In fact, there was a recent IPPR report called "Shifting the Dial." It is about shifting the end goal, shifting what we value, and therefore the knock-on effects on people and the environment are huge. So those are some of the things we've been doing in the last 3 years. And last summer we took what I've chosen to call a strategic pause, because we had been spinning a lot of plates, as you might have gathered from that quick whistle-stop tour. We felt we had got to a point where we'd tested, I put there enough working parts with a question mark, we tested enough to see that the principles behind what we were talking about resonated with people all over the city, that the skills that we were imparting did change lives, that these sorts of things worked with young people and old people, with Cliftonites and Northwesters and Lawrence Hill residents. It worked at all those different levels. We knew that for there to be a tipping point, there needed to be more of those things happening in different places. We can't run 10 different, it's been a little bit like running 10 different charities in the last 3 years, and we couldn't continue to do that. So we wanted to take a much more strategic and sustainable approach. Ironically, in some ways, go back to that original dream, which we knew would be a sensible way of working, and keep the whole thing much more manageable and more sustainable for ourselves, as well as for our team, many of whom are here and have stuck with us. So we've created a sort of strategic model, if you like, which I'm going to come to much more in the next bit. But the important thing about it is that it's very much about partnership approach to delivery. So all of those bits that I've just described, we as a small organisation, we have no vision of becoming some huge, big, we're not going to start, competing with the council for how many employees we have. We have no wish to become like that. What we want to do is be providing a service to partners all over the city who are doing incredibly exciting things already themselves and who are interested in working with us to support this notion of flourishing becoming embedded across the city. And that partnership approach is becoming more and more vital to our model, and which will leave us to focus much more on the kind of core things that we can provide to those partnerships to make sure they work well. One of the keys to those is working well with those who work with others, so we're beginning to work much better with some of the neighbourhood groups, some of the community groups, to help them, train them, support them, give them projects, etc., that work for their own objectives, that can start spreading these things out. And also working with the city-scale mechanisms like the council and the NHS, which I'm going to come to a little bit now. So helping us to be more strategic. We've been doing some really interesting work with the NHS. They're very sorry not to be here tonight. They wanted to do something with the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which the New Economics Foundation created. That never really taken off at a public level. And they came to us and said, you've obviously got an amazing record now of getting through to people and communicating with them in ways that get people to excited about something. Can you help us to do that with the 5 Ways to Wellbeing? So we've worked with them to create a whole campaign, which we're now beginning to roll out, starting with training people who are working right across the city in how to use 5 Ways in the way that they work. So it's embedding this thinking right across the sort of system of the city, if you like. We're also working with some housing associations. They are fantastic kind of mini test beds. George has talked a lot, I think, in some of his speeches about wanting Bristol to be a test bed. For us, housing associations are great. They're small communities with people who have multiple different challenges in their lives often. How can we support housing associations to use our product, use our skills, use our projects, and help to build communities based on these principles around how do we help each other to flourish, how do we work in ways that help to build resilience within our communities and within ourselves and with each other. So housing associations are really excited about the sort of things that we're offering them. Neighbourhoods, it's great Di is here. We've started already working with neighbourhoods. There's a particularly good example, we're working with Easton and Lawrence Hill neighbourhood where they're wanting to embed our project into the way they work, rather than saying, okay, we'll do that on the side, but actually how can they embed some of these things in because they're fulfilling their aims of helping the community to flourish. So how can we embed them? And groups like them and others are very interested when we have the index up and running and using the index as a way to measure this extraordinary impact that they're having, but doesn't necessarily come up in the sorts of measures that we currently use. And last but definitely not least, the city and the mayor. How can we work with the mayor's team and with city councillors? Again, more and more of those are now coming to us asking if they can get involved in some way to integrate this approach and this goal as a shared vision into their policy and their measurement and the way that the council works, so that those silos that are often the way in local politics. You know, I'm economics, I'm the environment, I'm education, I'm health. Actually, all of those things are drivers of flourishing lives. So how can the council pull those silos together by saying, actually, it doesn't matter whether I clean the corridors here or if I'm a mayor, our purpose here is to support the city to be a place where human beings flourish in a flourishing planet. And that can bring people together, it can help create a different mindset that can support that kind of moving away from the them and us of local politics, you know, the citizens complaining about what the council hasn't done. Actually, how can we empower everybody through that collaboration? So today, where are we? We've got today, but the next bit's bit simpler. So we're I think where we feel we've got to now, which is exciting for us, is we feel we're a city project, not a project in the city, which is actually a small but important shift, I think. I think we're beginning to get the capacity to work at a city scale rather than make small interventions in different parts of the city. That has been helped a lot by the mayor backing, so thank you very much for that. I think it's a practical and a symbolic kind of thing, that it helps people to see that this is a city project. We're looking at a whole range of quite exciting opportunities for bringing in European funding, because there's a lot of work at a global UN pushing around this area very much. Mark will be very up to date with all that. The Cabinet Office, core cities, these areas of the national scene are more and more interested. We've already had quite a lot of inquiries from other cities around the country, even the world. And we've got a large following in South Korea, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but we have. So there's this kind of impetus for, and we can really feel a palpable desire and energy for people wanting this, seeing the role it can play in the change that we need to get to, and we're very confident at the moment that will bring the support that we need. We've also got really exciting numbers of partners and volunteers coming forward saying, this is something I want to be a part of, I've got this great idea, I want to get involved in this way, I can see how my business can support you in this way, and that whole support is growing. And our own sustainability is growing, so the amount of work that we're earning as opposed to having to get from grants is also growing, which is important for us because we don't want to be an organisation that is dependent on grants forevermore. So our social enterprise aspect is growing by about 200%.
I just hit pause because I think you're edging. Is there anything you want to say before you go into the...
No, it's
magical flower.
No, that was great.
Thank you. Really good.
Can we take a real deep breath?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And
good. Thank you, ourselves.
thank you very much, Jules. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks so much.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Bye.
Yeah, so our own sustainability is growing by the minute, which is great. We're doing more and more work that actually pays us to do it, which is where we need to get to, because we don't want it to remain with begging bowl for too long. And also the sort of level of demonstrable impact is growing. So we've been doing quite a lot of work to try and write up what we have done to show that it makes a difference, and we're looking to Bristol University about potentially firming up some better relationships or stronger relationships with them to get them to help us to do that in the longer term. So what we need to get from where we are today to the model being a bit more fully formed are two particularly important steps. The first one, not surprisingly, is funding. We're going to have a bit of a conversation about this in a minute, but we have done all of that stuff that I've just described on the most extraordinarily small budget. I won't go into the detail. Our treasurer is here, and his grey hair going on is partly our fault. So we have done it on huge amounts of programming support and volunteer time and some small grants here and there. The model has always been that we would try and get within 5 years at the start, which is the end of 2015, to self-sustainability, which at the time seemed slightly over-optimistic. I think is looking pretty on course for that, I think, at the moment. But the next two and a half years will be, if we're going to take this to scale, will be crucial for us to land some really decent funding. So we can't take this to scale on the kind of funds we've currently been getting. But as I mentioned before, the prospects for those have gone through the roof in recent times, but we still haven't landed them. So funding is an absolutely crucial step. Building these strong partnerships, one of the reasons we got this meeting today, building really strong partnerships to help deliver all of this amazing impact is absolutely essential to getting to the kind of model that we want to create. And that model looks a bit like this. So where we're trying to get to in terms of the model is that we, as I mentioned before, provide some sort of core services, core support, and wonderful people like yourselves and all sorts of other groups around the city are delivering, multiplying, engaging with the sorts of projects that are out and about. Some of those are driven by us, and some of them are happening anyway, and they just are linking into the Happy City ethos, to our brand, and that sort of thing. That sort of side of it is growing. I'm going to quickly explain to you the core. The core will involve the measurement side, making sure we've got this brilliant measurement tool that every community group and every policymaker and every citizen in the city can use. Keeping up that communication, telling the story to the city, telling the story to people so that they're starting to get it, start engaging, getting involved, not just in our projects, but in the amazing community projects that are in every corner of this city. Coordination, helping this whole beautiful picture to coordinate itself. Help to tie in the stuff that's going on around the city, the great stuff that's going on at grassroots, into the policy, be a conduit for showing this helps people to flourish, that helps people to flourish. This is an amazing project, you need to give it more support, telling the story about that to policymakers, and eventually rolling this out to other cities. So that will include the things in the core, but also the best of the projects. So if people are running projects, we can roll those out to other cities as Happy City does. So that would be the kind of core offering that we would be giving. And then around that would be things like our Work Happy programme, where the partners are current partners in New Economics Foundation and Nick Marks, who set up his own consultancy, and solutions focus work, Martin Kurgaz. So we've got some fantastic partners for that one. Happiness Habits, which Miriam is partnering with us on. We've got Happy Schools Project, which we've got various different people potentially wanting to take that on board. Gavin might be helping us out a bit with that as well. Community Voice that we've been running with Howl. So filmmaking project, again, how can we roll that out in ways that support that important work to happen. Voice Bridges is a project with refugees. Again, we've got partners starting to really come forward saying we want to take this out and really, really work this across the city. These are all sorts of projects that either have been piloted, some of them very thoroughly, are in progress or are in discussion. And there are multiples of those, of great projects that are already happening that we're linking into, we're supporting, we're encouraging, and that are wanting more and more to be able to show to the public the happiness benefits of what they do. So that's where we want to get to. That is the model that we want to be able to offer to other cities, although it might be less blurry when we offer it to other cities. Once that model we feel is really, really working and strongly in place, the job then becomes about sharing it. So we're looking, Chen has already looked at promised to help us to pull together a sort of book, to share this story, share what works, share the model with other cities around the world. The universities I mentioned are really interested. We need to be working more and more with sharing it at a policy level. This big IPPR, Institute of Public Policy Research, thank you very much. Just brought out this big report about new measures of growth and prosperity. They looked at examples all over the world, and their 3 recommendations were almost could have been taken word for word from our original policy document that we came up with in 2010, and are exactly what we're doing. So we need to be feeding more into that stuff so that this stuff gets spread around the world. And then there are practical things that we can do around sharing. We're already working with the Intervention on Sunday to create the first city version of the Happy List, which is published at the same time as the Rich List nationally as an alternative. I don't need to do that. As an alternative, as an alternative to the Rich List. So anyway, we've got some great sharing opportunities.
Sorry, is that a list of cities, that list?
No, so the Happy List, do you know what the Happy List? Yeah, so the Happy List, for those who don't know, so the Rich List comes out every year in the Sunday Times, and on the same day, it's Independent on Sunday, we produce a Happy List. So the Rich List is lauding people just for the sake of whatever's in their bank balance. They may be wonderful people, I'm not dissing them, but that's the only reason they're on the Rich List. And the Happy List lauds people who most contribute to the happiness of their communities, their cities, their areas. And we are producing the first city version of it. So what David Randall at the Independent would love is if you had Happy Lists in every city around the country, and then there was a national one in the Independent on Sunday, but we're doing the first city one this April alongside the Independent on Sunday. And that's just one example, but we need to be sharing what's happening much more once that model is in place. So we've gone into the future now, in case you haven't spotted that lead. Supporting, both in Bristol, really supporting this burgeoning activity that's happening, and burgeoning activity that will be happening underneath the Happy City umbrella, really supporting that to start making the really substantial shift change that we want to see, and also supporting other groups who are increasingly emerging from other cities who want to take and adapt and use a model, which leads me absolutely to that notion of spreading the capacity to run this. So we have no intention at all of going around different parts of the city doing Happy City in every other city, but we do massively want to support and spread the capacity for this to groups in those cities themselves. How can we really encourage and nourish those people to be able to do this probably slightly more easily than we have, because we've done lots of the trialling and testing for them. So the dream to reality bit, where do we want to get to in the next 5 years? That Bristol is absolutely a city powered by a focus on happiness, that actually flourishing people and planet is at the heart of how the city works. That more and more UK cities measure their success using the Happy City Index. That there are Happy City projects starting up and sprouting up in places around, well, South Korea probably first, I think. Around the world potentially. And in those cities, actually people are starting to see a difference. You know, the thing is with the happiness agenda, we've written a lot of briefings recently for the City Council about why happiness is a serious issue. You know, when we've been talking to community workers around the city, and we ask them what are the effects of a low level of well-being and resilience in their cities. You know, the seriousness of that list is phenomenal. From mental health issues, probably the most obvious one, but actually the level of community engagement disappears. Health and education figures are affected. Huge economic implications, unemployment, crime, disaffection. All of these things are often outcomes of low well-being. So there are lots and lots and lots of benefits of a city that focuses on the things that really make a big difference to people's lives. So we want to start seeing that in real terms, so that we're measuring the softer stuff, but actually we're also seeing the impact in the harder measures as well. So that's where we're heading to, and we'd really like you all to be on board. What we would like to do now, I'm very happy to take the odd question if there's anything burning, but what we'd really like to do is to do 2 little